Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Noosa. I'm going to be here to break down the UFC Vegas 47 card from top to bottom, and we start with the main event, a fun one between Jack Hermansson and Sean Strickland. Now, the betting line, some people may see it as a little bit wide. You know, Strickland's roughly around a minus 200 favourite, but I kind of agree where it's at the minute, and I'm not sure whether, listen, I've always been a fan of Jack Hermansson, but I'm not sure whether he has peaked and he is declining a little bit. And that when these fighters now are coming to the top of the division, he's going to be struggling against them. And ultimately, that's what I see in this fight against Sean Strickland, because Sean Strickland is never going to really set the world alight inside the cage, in my opinion. But what he is very good at is just being technical, accurate, landing straight punches. But from a defensive perspective, he's also decent with his wrestling defense. He's very difficult to take down, and if you do get him down, he can work his way back up to his feet. But because of his speed and movement and the fact that he's always peppering a jab or a straight punch in your face, it's very difficult to close the distance and take him down. And ultimately, that's where I see Jack Hermansson winning this fight, should he win it. And that's why I think it's going to be difficult for Hermansson to win the fight, because I think that Hermansson is just going to get soundly outstruck on the feet. I think Hermansson's got to close the distance. I think he's got to try and take Strickland down. And he might, with this being a 5-round fight, get this fight down once or twice. But I don't think that he's going to be able to do anything substantial once the fight hits the mat. And then that's when it's going to be a problem, because Strickland's going to get back up to his feet. That's going to just hurt the morale of Hermansson inside the cage, knowing that his opponent is taking him down, but they keep on getting back up. And ultimately, I just think Strickland's just going to pour a lot of volume on Hermansson over 5 rounds. I'm not sure whether he finds a finish. If he does, it's probably more likely to be late, an accumulation of volume type of finish. But I do think that Strickland is going to be able to keep this fight on the feet for the majority of the fight and just outpoint, pepper away, and just land a ton of volume on Hermansson. So I'm picking Sean Strickland to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun one here between Punahele, Soriano, and Nick Maximov. And this is a really interesting fight because Nick Maximov is absolutely a wrestler and grappler. You know, we've seen him against high-level BJJ black belts in BJJ tournaments. And we saw that in Maximov's debut in the UFC as well. His wrestling game's also really underrated, in my opinion. He does do a good job of wrestling. And actually, if you watch his last fight, the debut in the UFC, you'll hear DC talking about the correct things that he's doing from a fundamental perspective. So for me, Maximov is a good wrestler. He's a very good grappler. With Soriano, though, Soriano's also got a wrestling background. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Maximov can take him down. Soriano absolutely has the striking and the power advantage, though, and I think if this fight does play out on the feet for the majority of the fight, then Soriano's either going to find a knockout or he's just going to be able to light Maximov up for the majority of the fight over the 3 rounds. But I'm actually leaning towards the underdog here in Nick Maximov, because although I do think Maximov is at a big striking disadvantage here, because of that, I think Maximov's going to waste no time. I think he's going to be relentless in just trying to get a hold of Soriano, so Soriano doesn't pull away with the fight and he doesn't give Soriano every opportunity to knock him out. I think he's going to stick to Soriano early in this fight, take him down. I think Soriano might be able to get back up to his feet, but I think Maximov will keep a hold of him, keep rinsing and repeating that process and just taking him down. And actually what I think is going to happen is I think Soriano, come the second round, is going to start tiring out. Once he starts tiring, I think the takedowns will become a little easier for Maximov. Now, this isn't going to be an easy fight for Maximov. I don't think he's just going to go in there and just absolutely roll all over Soriano. I think he's going to eat some shots. I think he's going to have to enter and close the distance, enter the clinch, close the distance very methodically, very wisely, use fight IQ to do it. But ultimately, I think the line's way too off in this fight. I think it should be much closer. And I think Maximov, the style that he possesses, should be enough to tire Soriano. And that should be enough to allow him to take over the fight and win at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. So for that reason, I'm picking Nick Maximov to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is my favourite fight on the entire card. We've got Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Carlston Harris. A really interesting fight against 2 fighters that have been perfect in the UFC so far. Rakhmonov, a lot of people are seeing as a solid prospect. He can strike. He's got good range. He's got good kicks. He follows up with good punches, mixes everything well on the feet. But then he's also got a good wrestling game, combat sambo. He's also got a good grappling game as well. We've seen him submit, again, Michel Prazeres, a very difficult fighter to finish, and Rakhmonov submitted him. And then from Carlston Harris's perspective, he's a little less technical than Rakhmonov, but in my opinion, I think he's a more physical presence inside the cage. He's stronger, he likes the clinch, he likes the grind, but he's also got good submissions himself. From an offensive perspective, he's got a very solid Darce, Anaconda, those types of front chokes. Once he locks one of those in, it's going to be very difficult for opponents to escape. So it's a real interesting fight from that perspective. I do think the line's wide. I don't think Rakhmonov should be a -200 favourite, but I do think that Rakhmonov is slightly going to have an edge in the majority of the areas in this fight. From a striking perspective, although Carlston Harris is dangerous and he does pack power in his strikes, Rakhmonov's speed, his movement, his distance, his range, and the variety of strikes he throws, mixing in with the kicks and the punches, is going to be a problem for Harris. I think for Harris to win this fight, he's got to close the distance. He's got to pin Rakhmonov against the cage and just grind an ugly type of game plan out. We've seen him do it in previous fights, and he's got to do it here, but I just don't think he's going to be successful. And if he is successful, the moments where Rakhmonov does break and start striking, I think the judges will favour that anyway. So I do feel that it's going to be a close fight. I feel the line is too wide. It should be much closer, but I do agree that Rakhmonov is the favourite, and I'm picking Shavkat Rakhmonov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Bryan Battle versus Tresean Gore. Now, this fight should have actually been the Ultimate Fighter 29 finale, but Tresean Gore had to pull out with an injury. So Bryan Battle ended up fighting Abina and he won, but now Gore's back. They're actually running this fight back, which I'm really happy about because, like I said, that should have been the Ultimate Fighter finale and it wasn't. I think this is a good fight for Tresean Gore. Tresean Gore, even though he's not got a lot of experience, when you actually watch his fights, he looks light years ahead from a technical and skill set perspective than what his experience and his record tells you. And weirdly, I see a little bit of Edson Barboza, just a hint in the type of game and the type of fight that he likes to fight. He's got solid leg kicks. He'll throw solid leg kicks from both stances, using both legs as well. Switch left, lead front kick. He's got a good leg kick with his right leg as well. And then he's got power in his left hand. He's got power in his right hand. And it's almost one of them where I just don't know which one is his power hand, because he's got power everywhere from both sides, hands and legs as well. Now, the thing is with Bryan Battle, one thing that he does have going for him here is, although he's not a specialist in one particular area, he is pretty good everywhere. Now, on the show, Tresean Gore did get taken down, or was attempted to be taken down a couple of times. He did defend takedowns relatively well. Again, good fundamentals, spreading the base, looking for the underhooks, separating, and he's really calm and patient. He's got a Muay Thai type of style. And I just feel that Bryan Battle is definitely going to have moments in this fight. I know he is. He'll be searching for takedowns. He might even get a takedown. The one worry is Tresean Gore potentially showing his back if he tries to stand up after a takedown, because Bryan Battle will try and take the back and look to rear naked choke him. But ultimately, I just feel that Tresean Gore is the better fighter here. He's more dangerous on the feet. He's more technical. And we saw Abina stun Bryan Battle in that fight for the Ultimate Fighter finale. And once he stunned Battle, Battle did freeze up a little bit. And you've got to think that when Gore's landing these hard shots, if Bryan Battle freezes up here, then Gore will just take advantage of that with his power, with the danger that he imposes inside the cage. So, like I say, I think that Bryan Battle is definitely going to have moments in this fight. He's the more well-rounded fighter, but I am picking the specialist, the striking specialist, the fighter that specialises in that one particular area. I'm picking Tresean Gore to win this fight. And in the next fight, this should be a really fun fight as well. We've got Julian Erosa versus Steven Peterson. And this should, like I've said, this should be absolutely fun. On the feet, they're both going to be wild. They both like getting in their opponent's face. They've got no problems in taking a punch to give a punch. They've got no problems entering a slugfest. And this is what's going to make for an interesting fight. From a wrestling and grappling perspective, they can both wrestle. They're both decent grapplers as well. So they're really, really well matched. And I actually think that the betting line's quite off in this fight. Julian Erosa is a big favourite. And although I do agree that he's a favourite, I don't think it should be that wide. The fight's going to be wild. It's going to be explosive. They're going to slug it out toe-to-toe inside the cage. And I just feel that, like I said, I do understand that why Julian Erosa is the favourite in this fight. And I think Erosa is going to have the slight edge in most areas in this fight. I think he's going to be the more physical fighter inside the cage. Physical advantages. I think he's going to land more volume. I think he's just going to hit Peterson more than Peterson hits him. And that's going to be a problem if the fight does hit the mat. I see it more likely being Peterson shooting takedowns, but I think Erosa can hang down there. I think he'll be able to stand back up. And even in the fights that Erosa loses against much better level competition, like Julio Arce, for example, he doesn't show a bad side to his game. You know, he's still in the fight, he's still competitive, but he's facing a step down from the likes of your Sean Woodson and your Julio Arce, and I think it's going to show on the night. I'm picking Julian Erosa to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Miles Johns versus John Castaneda. I think this is a fight that is actually pretty good for Miles Johns. John Castaneda's no slouch. He's got good speed, he's got good movement, he strikes well. But what's concerning is, especially in his last fight against Eddie Wineland, although it was an impressive finish, finished him with a beautiful combination whilst moving forward. But prior to that moment, Eddie Wineland of old, you know, came through, shown through when he's on a bit of a decline as well, and he was putting it together against John Castaneda. And it's a bit of a worry because Miles Johns, he's coming off 2 knockout wins, both in the 3rd round as well, which is definitely something to keep an eye on because it proves that he can go late. But Miles Johns has got a good technical boxing game. Again, before his knockout loss against Mario Bautista, Miles Johns was putting it together really nicely on the feet. But Johns has also got a solid wrestling game. Now, his topside jiu-jitsu isn't the best. He can't hold fighters down at this level for extended periods of time. At least he hasn't demonstrated that yet anyway. But he can rinse and repeat with his wrestling. He does have good cardio. And like I said, he's got a good technical side to his boxing game as well. So although John Castaneda is going to have his moments in this fight, I do think overall Miles Johns is going to do a good job on the feet. I think he's going to be the more technical striker. And then when it comes to the wrestling, I do think that that's a good plan B, or it might even be his plan A. But I do think that he's got a wrestling advantage as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Miles Johns to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fun striking battle here between Hakeem Dawodu and Mike Trizano. Mike Trizano coming off a phenomenal win against Ludovic Klein. I bet Trizano in that fight as a plus 200 underdog. He came through, it was close, but it proved that it should have been more of a coin flip than a 2-1 underdog for Trizano. But in this fight, I'm swaying back over to the other side. I think Hakeem Dawodu, it's going to be a close fight in parts. The line isn't too far off. But I do think that Dawodu is the better technical striker overall. He's got a good Muay Thai style. He'll stalk, he'll kick hard, he'll punch hard, he'll mix combinations together really well. Now, the one thing I will say for Trizano is he will keep himself in this fight. He will be in this fight for as long as it lasts. He's durable, he'll continue to come forwards. And I just feel that Trizano will give himself opportunities to do well and he'll have his moments, but ultimately I think Dawodu's speed, his movement, his power, and ultimately the volume difference I think is going to be on the side of Dawodu. And should this fight go to a decision, which I think is the more likely outcome for how the fight ends, I do think Dawodu is going to have done more in at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. A close fight, I see Dawodu edging it on the feet where the fight should be won and lost. I'm picking Hakeem Dawodu to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Marc-Andre Barriault versus Chidi and Njokuani. And it's a really interesting fight from a stylistic perspective because Barriault is, as his nickname suggests, a power boy, likes to come forwards, be aggressive, be physical, clinch, grind, put it on his opponent, land hard shots. But Chidi and Njokuani's got a kickboxing background and you can really see that. His speed, his movement on the feet is elusive. He can fight really well moving backwards. He can fight well moving forwards. He's also good in the clinch as well. So if his opponent is pushing him backwards or forcing him backwards, he can stand his ground, enter the clinch, and he lands some really nice knees to the body, then tries to land them to the head as well. And Njokuani's game from a striking perspective is really well-rounded, but he's also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt as well, which definitely helps him on the mat. He can get back up to his feet if he's taken down, and he can secure good top control and land some good ground and pound as well. Marc-Andre Barriault, though, he is going to have moments in this fight, but I do think stylistically he's going to have difficulties for as long as the fight goes on at the same time as well, because I think he's going to get outlanded. I think the volume is definitely going to be on the side of Njokuani. I also think that Njokuani is the more accurate fighter. He's going to be the more active fighter. I think he's going to have a speed and movement advantage as well. And where Barriault normally has advantages in these types of fights is if he can clinch up, grind them, use his strength and physical nature against the cage. But the thing is with Njokuani, even if his back's against the cage and he can't escape, he'll continuously, just make a little bit of space to start landing knees to the midsection of his opponents. And that's where the judges will like it. Even if Barriault's pinning him against the cage, as long as Njokuani's the more active fighter against the cage, then the judges will like that. And that's ultimately where I see the fight going. I think whilst they're out in space, moving forwards or backwards, Njokuani's going to be okay. And I think if Barriault pins him against the cage, I think he's going to be landing good shots defensively as well. And if Barriault takes him down, I think Njokuani will be able to get back up to his feet. I just feel like he's going to have more bases covered in this fight. So for that reason, I'm picking Chidi and Njokuani to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight between Jason Witt and Philip Rowe. And this is a really good fight stylistically because it is a big clash of styles. You've got Philip Rowe that's definitely more of a striker, longer, faster, likes to fight at range, but will pour inactivity and volume as well. But then on the other side, you've got Jason Witt, who is more of a brute force striker in regards to his boxing, but he's got a good wrestling game. He will be able to score takedowns. And this is where the problems come for Philip Rowe in previous fights, because for as good as Rowe is on the feet, he does tire a little bit when his activity levels get too high. And then he is susceptible to be taken down. And that's where Jason Witt's going to have success should he have this game plan. And it's all about how much do you trust that game plan from Witt. If this is the Witt that we see that came in against Bryan Barriault, was quite unlucky to lose that fight in my opinion in an absolute war, then I think that Jason Witt will beat Philip Rowe. Maybe with relative ease, which is crazy to say with Witt being the underdog, but Witt's definitely going to have moments where he needs to be defensively sound because Philip Rowe will land volume, straight, long shots from range, from distance. But again, with the small cage, I feel like it's flipping back to Jason Witt a little bit. And that's actually where I'm leading for this fight. I think the small cage helps Witt. I do think that Witt's going to come in with a wrestling game plan. And if he doesn't, then after about 90 seconds, 2 minutes, I think that Witt will revert back to that wrestling approach, that relentless wrestling. And once the takedowns start, I do think that Philip Rowe will start to tire a little bit. I think Witt will be able to continuously get takedowns throughout the rest of the fight. I think Witt's going to be able to do enough in regards to the wrestling and topside grappling for at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. So I'm picking Jason Witt to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a fight between Alexis Davis and Julija Stoliarenko. And this, again, is a pretty interesting fight, especially when you consider the betting line. You know, Alexis Davis is quite a big favourite in this fight. I think it's just like a -225 favourite. But I think this fight is going to be much closer than the betting line suggests. And I'm actually edging towards the underdog in Julija Stoliarenko. I think Stoliarenko is definitely a fighter that doesn't mind a brawl. She'll get in the face of her opponent. She'll land volume. She doesn't have bad wrestling. I do think the one concern in this fight, though, is if Alexis Davis does just opt for the wrestling and absolutely nothing else, I do think that Stoliarenko can be taken down. But again, against Julia Vila, we saw Stoliarenko hit some sweeps on the mat, get on top momentarily before leg locks started appearing. So Stoliarenko's not a bad fighter. I do think the betting line definitely should be much closer. And I actually think that if Stoliarenko can keep this fight standing more often than not and just make this fight be won and lost in the striking department, then Stoliarenko is going to enter a war with Alexis Davis. And Alexis Davis, we've seen her accept these wars. She gets cut up badly, she gets bruised badly, she gets lumped badly. And I think Stoliarenko, if she can make this a brawl, I think she's going to be able to take Alexis Davis out. And if not, get a win on the scorecards by winning at least 2 out of the 3 rounds. The big worry, like I've already said, is if Davis comes in to try and wrestle Stoliarenko for 3 rounds. But I think the better work is going to be done on the feet. I like Stoliarenko to do that better work on the feet. I'm picking Julija Stoliarenko to win this fight. And in the next fight, a good fight between Danilo Marques and Jailton Almeida. Now, this is a good fight because both fighters are pretty much identical. You know, they both like to grapple, they both like to use the physical presence, get their opponent down, and use the BJJ to suffocate their opponent on top line, ground and pound, look for submissions. The only real difference is, even though they both, again, don't look to like striking too much, the only difference from that perspective is Danilo Marques is more about his hands, whereas Almeida is definitely more about his kicks, front kicks. But I do think that in this scenario, we often say, you know, when it's grappler versus grappler, are we going to have a 15-minute kickboxing fight? I actually don't think that here. I think both fighters are going to want to try and get the fight down to the mat, because whoever gets the most top time in this fight is going to be the fighter that wins the fight, because I do believe the fight is just going to hit the mat. And I think that Almeida is just better. I think he's bigger, I think he's stronger, I think his takedowns are a little bit better and more varied as well. I think his gas tank is going to be better than Marquez's. And Almeida's just more relentless. And I think once the fight hits the mat, I think Almeida on top is just going to cause a lot of problems for Marques. Some people might argue that the line is too wide, and you might have a point, but I just don't see Jailton Almeida just being taken down constantly and allowing Marques to work on top and land ground and pound and look for submissions. I think Almeida's grappling is a little bit better. I think his wrestling's better. I think his striking is quite similar. but I think his cardio is better than Marquez's as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jailton Almeida to win this fight. And the final fight on the breakdown, on the podcast, we've got Malcolm Gordon versus Denis Bondar. Bondar supposed to have had his debut not so long ago, but he's had a few cancelled fights for, you know, numerous reasons. He does look to be back on this card though, and I think this is a good fight for him against Malcolm Gordon. Denis Bondar, to me, he looks like a fighter that's very well-rounded. He's aggressive, he's got good striking, he's patient, got good movement, got really good awareness of danger as well. When it's getting a little bit too much, he will slide back out of range, reassess what's happening, then go again, get into the pocket and start landing shots. But he's also got a good takedown game. He's got good control once he gets his opponent on the mat as well. The one area that I do feel that Bondar needs to be careful of in this fight though, is I think that if Bondar takes Gordon down, he's got to be very careful of the submission game of Gordon off his back. He does like to throw legs up for arm bars, for triangles, and potentially look for sweeps and reversals. So as long as Bondar minds his P's and Q's with that submission defense and doesn't get submitted by an armbar off Gordon's back, which, you know, doesn't happen very often at this level, I think he's going to be okay. I think he's the better striker than Gordon. I think he's the better wrestler. And once he's got Gordon settled, we'll see that he's the better grappler as well. I completely agree with Bondar being around a -250 favourite here. I'm picking Denis Bondar to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast for UFC Vegas 47. I hope you all enjoyed the breakdowns. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for subscribing and liking the video as well. That really is appreciated, all the support that you guys are showing. Once again, thank you. Enjoy the fights on Saturday night, and we'll see you next week.